What does the UN, the Soviet Union, and the Vatican have in common? All of them push for the same agenda, that if you have no home or money, you will be happy. In April 2021, Pope Francis spoke of the regeneration of existing institutions and global governance, because we are in debt to nature itself. A few days later, he recited Acts 4:32 from the Bible. All the believers were in one heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. Leaving his congregation somewhat bewildered, he went on to explain that sharing ownership is not communism, but pure Christianity. The elites have been desperate for another war because it gives them the perfect excuse to evict the masses from their private property. For one's home is one's castle, and offers a degree of legal protection for its occupants, at least in comparison to individual rights afforded by public property and land. The law of eminent domain in the US, compulsory purchases in Britain and Australasia, resumption in Hong Kong, and expropriation in another 20 countries ensures that many governments can take and transfer the legal ownership of any land or property belonging to a private citizen. In general, property is compulsorily purchased for roads, government buildings, and public utilities. But in times of war, the state has carte blanche when it comes to land acquisition. During World War II, thousands of British properties were confiscated on behalf of the armed forces. The state repurposed farmland and historic buildings into barracks, firing ranges, air bases, and civil defence headquarters. Due to the severe damage, vandalism, and even theft carried out on such properties, a new amendment to the law was introduced. Soon enough, many requisition properties had been left in an uninhabitable condition and were sold to commercial developers, providing far more taxable revenue for the government. A legal amendment that invariably invited corruption and bribery, which created the building boom of the 1950s and 60s. Billeting was big in the Second World War. A billet is a private living quarters assigned to a soldier. The practice began in the 16th century against enormous public protest and was outlawed by 1689. But by the 18th century, it had started up again. In the US, the quartering of soldiers in civilian homes caused a similar backlash, leading to the Third Amendment to the US Constitution. In the 1984 British Cold War propaganda film Threads, the survivors of thermonuclear attack were forced to share their homes. Those few properties that remained standing were crammed full of the sick and dying, and all inhabitants were made to work for food. Britain is a comparatively small island and contains far more people than it can support. Over the decades, most farmers have been priced out of the market. Roads and motorways and the urban sprawl has left little room for agriculture. Yet during the past 40 years of a European open-door policy, we have doubled the population. That's a lot of hungry mouths need feeding. These days, Britain relies on imports of every kind to survive. Most British manufacturers, including those in the food sector, have been bought up by corporate monopolies and relocated to Europe and beyond. Should the supply lines break down and we run out of food, the British government have no real contingency plan. The system has been engineered to fail, and Britain isn't the only country on the brink of disaster. Should the worst happen, there will be riots, mass imprisonment, even executions for stealing or hoarding food. Except if you're rich or high up in government, because it's always been that way. What's worse now is that the elites have already built their prisoner of war camps in every industrial park and shopping mall in the world. All they need to do now is point the way. In some parts of the world, individuals still have the right to protect their own property and its inhabitants at all costs. Self-defense is a given, but legally, when it comes to one's own eminent domain, the state, the United Nations, and the NWO have ensured that just about anyone can break into your home. Some years back, the British media were fixated with home invasions and armed burglaries. After several landmark cases, the public realised that property owners have less rights than violent intruders. I'm reminded of a home invasion scene from Kubrick's Clockwork Orange. Alex and his droogs broke into the home of a successful writer and spent the night torturing him and raping his wife. Ever since the pandemic and the undemocratic actions of the state, recruitment in the armed forces, the police and the emergency services have dropped to an all-time low. There have been instances, especially at large gatherings and marches, where protesters have witnessed police wearing uniforms without any official insignia or personal identification. These are private security forces with corporate legal protection and professional anonymity. The New World Order has recruited a global army of mercenaries to do their dirty work for them. Should the people believe the lies and let the government play their war games, then who knows what will happen next? Those same hired thugs, the uniformed droogs in all but name, might just come knocking at our doors. Except this time, they'll be moving in and we'll be moving out, dragged away to some godforsaken industrial park, held prisoner with every other enemy of the state.